friends, and thanks for joining me again. And today I want to talk to you about some of the absolute worst financial advice that I have gotten. Some of this has been from family, some has been from friends, a few people have been on my YouTube channel. So I just wanted to share with you some of the worst pieces of financial advice that I have ever gotten and why I think that those pieces of advice are wrong and what to do instead, of course. The first one is probably one of the first pieces of financial advice I got way back a long time ago, and it was to not get a shorter mortgage because you're going to end up writing off all of your interest anyway. And we all know, obviously, that this is terrible advice. If you want more information on this, I actually did a whole video on this, but just as a quick spoiler alert, it's something like if you give your bank $5,000, the government will give you $1,200 of it back. That's not a very good piece of advice, that's not a very good trade. So unfortunately, even though we get to write off our mortgage interest, we don't really get a 100% tax benefit. It's only a portion of that money that we end up getting back from the government from having written it off. So no, the amount of mortgage interest that we pay does matter. And so the advice to not get a shorter mortgage so that we could just write off as much interest as we could for as long as possible is a terrible, terrible piece of advice. The next one would be don't pay off your mortgage because your interest rate is so low anyway. I did another video on this one too, talking about this topic, and there's an effective interest rate or an actual interest rate that is much higher than the interest rate that you think that you're paying. So just as a quick example, I plopped these numbers into my mortgage calculator, and a 3.875% 30-year mortgage has an effective interest rate of about 67%. So for every $100,000 we borrow, we have to pay $67,000 back in interest over the life of that loan. And so again, don't pay back your mortgage because the interest rate is so low is again very terrible advice, because we will end up paying much higher actual interest rates or effective interest rates when it comes to the fact that the interest rate is compounding and because it's spread over such a long period of time. So yes, I believe heavily, as you know, in paying off mortgages early, and I believe in shorter mortgages when we can afford them. And both of these things I think are pretty solid advice. The next one is very similar to the last two, and it's don't pay off your mortgage or pay extra toward your mortgage because there's so much better that you could be doing with your money. And again, I think that this one is not true. Even when I tried calculating this with numbers on what you could get as an average return from the stock market or any other type of investing, it actually made more sense to pay off the debt, and even then, that's more of a surefire thing than investing anyway, because sometimes when we invest, the investments go up, sometimes they don't go up as quickly, sometimes they go down. And so because investments can be risky, but paying off debt is pretty surefire, I am of the opinion that paying off the debt is a better use of the money right now, and then if we have extra money to play with, investing can always be a good thing too. So yeah, not paying off the debt so that you can invest instead could end up in a very bad situation where you lose the money that you could have, put toward the debt, and then you still have the debt anyway. So yeah, definitely be careful with this one. The next one would be to keep a credit card for emergencies. This sort of implies that people would be living check to check and constantly broke anyway, so when you have an emergency, you need some kind of credit to fall back on. This is a very slippery slope. So if we were to be living paycheck to paycheck now, and then we were to have an emergency, and then we have a bill to pay because of the credit card, and now we have an extra thing, I mean, this could very easily suck us down into this horrible debt trap hole where we just can't get ourselves out of it in any easy way. So I honestly believe that the much safer way to do this would be to have cash for emergencies, not literal cash, but money set aside for emergencies, and not a credit card. Credit cards are not meant for emergencies. When I was about 18, actually, this is my next set of advice. I had one family member who told me never ever get a credit card because credit cards are evil. That was bad advice because I needed a credit card in order to get good credit in order to buy a house. So that was a bad piece of advice too. So both pieces of advice aren't really correct. You have to use them correctly. So yes, credit cards aren't always a smart thing for everyone, but I don't necessarily think that they are all evil. It's how we use them. So there are people out there who can have a credit card for like 15+ years and never ever carry a balance on it. And then there are people who will get a credit card and run up the balance. And there's nothing wrong with not having a credit card if you know that that's not something that you should have. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Just like how when you're dieting, you need to know maybe not to bring home certain foods so that you won't eat them. You know, obviously, if that's something that you struggle with, it would be better not to have a credit card because you know that that's something that you could potentially struggle with. Everybody has their struggles and everybody's different, and there's nothing wrong with having something be one person's particular struggle. So if we just acknowledge that that's our struggle and then we don't have a credit card, that's okay too. So not getting a credit card because they're evil is bad advice, but also having a credit card for emergencies is bad advice. The good piece of advice that I got was actually from my grandparents, who said, get a credit card, put a very low balance, not very low balance, very low credit limit on it, and then use just tiny, minute amounts on it, and then pay it off right away. That was really solid advice. The next one is one that I kind of laugh at inside, but this happens a lot. I hear this a lot actually, and it's that you need to drive a brand new car because you need a car that's reliable. Now, I honestly agree that we all need cars that are reliable. Nobody wants to be stuck, you know, or have a repair or whatever, but I honestly believe that used cars can be just as reliable as newer ones. And I honestly think that this idea that only the brand new cars are reliable is something that we've been brainwashed into thinking so that we will continue to support the brand new car industry. So this is something that they have perpetrated on us to sort of, you know, convince us is true so that we'll keep continuing to buy their depreciating assets at inflated prices. So yes, this is bad advice. Buying a brand new car is something I have absolutely no interest in ever doing at any point in my life ever, and I will never ever do that. So unless I had to or some other thing, I mean, if I won it on The Price is Right or something like that, fine, I'll take the new car, but I'm never going to walk into a car lot and buy a brand new car. It's just never going to happen. The next one is that you have to go to college to be somebody. This is something that I feel like we were brainwashed into thinking from a very young age. So I went to public school when I was a kid, and even all the way through elementary school, it was always like, what are you going to do when you grow up? What are you going to go to college for? And all this, you know, your parents should be having a college fund for you. And there was just a lot of like college, you know, promotion basically our entire lives. And we were basically convinced that if we didn't go to college, we wouldn't end up getting any kind of a job, we wouldn't stand out in the job market, and that we would never end up actually being anyone of any kind of importance. But honestly, I do not believe that we have to go to college in order to be somebody. We can be someone even without a college degree, and we can actually make some pretty decent money in the working world without having any kind of degree either. So, yep, this one was bad financial advice. And the second one kind of goes along with that, and that's if you get your student loans, if you go to college, obviously you have to go to college, right? If you get student loans in order to pay for it, it'll be a good investment because that money will come back. Well, I obviously did not take this advice, as many of you know, but a lot of my friends did, and many of them are still struggling to pay off those student loans to this day. And who knows if they'll ever see the end of that, especially for the people who went to school for a long time. So honestly, you know, even if it takes 10, 20, 30, 50 years to pay them off, I just don't see this as being a good investment of, you know, the money. I know a lot of people do, and a lot of people have been convinced that they are, and maybe in some instances it is a good, you know, thing for some people to do, depending on what, you know, field people are going into, and that there's a hot job market for that, and that there's a good, you know, earning potential. But even still, I honestly believe that it's better to go to college debt-free if we can, and then help, you know, to pay for that by, you know, living a really frugal lifestyle and working while we're in college and things like that. There are ways around it to where we don't have to get student loans, and I think that that's a much better choice than it is to rack up a bunch of student loans that we may never pay off, you know, in our real life. The next one is something I usually don't talk about much on my channel because it kind of falls into this whole like worldview, kind of religious kind of category. And it's that the world or God will provide for you. And while I don't necessarily disagree with that, I think that that gives people a mind of, you know, our spirit of complacency, this attitude of complacency, to where we don't necessarily feel like we should be doing anything because the world or whatever, the universe or God, is just going to protect us and take care of us and provide everything for us, when I don't necessarily believe that is the case. So even in the Bible, people worked for their earning and their living. Nobody was just supposed to sit around and make no money and then, you know, stuff would just fall out of the sky. Again, I know this is a sticky situation and a sticky one, but I've heard this before. I've had a few friends that have said, oh, don't worry about it, you'll be provided for, you don't really have to do this or worry about this. And while I agree that you don't have to worry, we do need to work. We do need to do our part and take care of ourselves as best as we can by being as diligent as we can. I do believe that is something that we should do. The next one is totally funny, and it's YOLO, you only live once, right? Just live for today, who cares about tomorrow? And this is terrible advice because we will most likely be alive tomorrow, and we don't want to have screwed ourselves over with what we did yesterday, or what we, screw our future selves over 5-10 years from now based on the decisions we're making today either. So I know, obviously I'm in the housing industry and I see tons of people all the time who have screwed themselves over with their life decisions, and they always, always, always regret it. And who do they have to be mad at except for themselves? So yes, I do believe we should be enjoying our lives, but we should also be planning for the future and acting like we're going to be alive tomorrow, next week, next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And we should not necessarily be screwing ourselves over like that. That just does not make any good financial sense. The next one is some advice that I have gotten on my channel, and it's that your credit score does not matter. This is really common among certain people who follow, certain financial gurus, and this is probably one of the ones that frustrates me the most inside because, again, being in the housing industry, I see this one tear people's lives up all the time. So your credit score absolutely matters. And if you want to sink your credit score, it's going to cost hundreds or thousands of dollars every single year until you get a good credit score again. Like, it just does not make any sense. It's almost like hearing someone say, oh yeah, it's a good idea, shoot yourself in the foot. I'm like, no, I think I might need my foot. So when it comes to our credit score though, if we want to get any kind of a loan for anything ever, if you want to get a mortgage or some other thing, I think the other thing that really frustrates me about this piece of advice is that the particular financial guru who pushes this idea has a mortgage company that he endorses, and so he gets kickbacks. So it feels to me a little bit like a sales funnel. So, he tells people to sink their credit score, their credit score doesn't matter, and then they get pushed into this area of life where they can't get a mortgage unless they go through this manual underwriting company. And so therefore they have to go through a company like the one he endorses in order to get a mortgage. And then of course it's at a higher interest rate because it's a higher risk mortgage. And it just doesn't make any sense at all. From a financial standpoint, why would a financial guru tell you to sink your credit score and know that it's going to cost you thousands of dollars to do so? That's not solid advice, except for himself, because then they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, no house, or the company he endorses or similar ones to it. And so I think that's probably why it frustrates me the most, is because it just seems like such a wolf in sheep's clothing thing to say. So that being said, I know a lot of people don't believe in, keeping a good credit score. That's totally up to you. I am not going to shoot myself in the foot, and I think this is probably the absolute worst piece of financial advice out of all of them. And then the next one is semi-frustrating to me, but it's nowhere near as frustrating as the last one, and that's you can kind of hide your debt if you pay it off with other debt. So this is one that I heard from one of my videos here recently. Someone was like, well, I know how to pay off a mortgage. You just get a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, and then you pay off your mortgage with that. Well, okay, so your mortgage is at, say 4%. The average HELOC is like 6%, depending on how much money you take out. That just doesn't make any sense at all. It will reduce the payment, sure, but it's also an interest-only payment, which means you never make any headway on the balance, on the principal. So that doesn't really pay off your house. You still have a loan against your house with a mortgage. You have a loan against your house with a HELOC. That just doesn't make sense. Or borrowing money from family and friends to pay off debt. There's no urgency to pay that kind of money back because there isn't that pain of seeing that bill every month or having to have that interest that you're constantly being charged. And so I think that's going to screw over people with their relationships with people. It's just different things like that. Moving one credit card balance to another credit card or whatever. This is sort of this like sleight of hand, kind of moving of debt from here to there to try to hide it when it doesn't go away. It's not making it disappear. It's not helping anything. And so paying off debt with other debt is probably a bad decision in most cases. Maybe if there's a high interest credit card and you could move it to a low interest credit card, if we were diligent in making sure we're paying that off. Our goal is to pay it off, and we're not just going to run up a new balance on the credit card like statistically most people do. We have to make sure that we're going to basically not continue to use that credit card in a way that we can't pay it off every month. So yeah, paying off debt with other debt is a bad financial piece of advice. Wow, that video was longer than I meant for it to be, but hey, I guess there's a whole lot of bad financial advice out there. So anyway, I would like to hear from you what your bad pieces of financial advice are that you have gotten in life, and hopefully we can learn from each other so that we don't have to make those same mistakes. So hopefully this video was helpful to you. I'm Frugal Green Girl, and we'll see you next week.